All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to just run through the assignment, and then we can have an opportunity to talk about it. But I'm not going to talk about this overview. This talks about the, what it means to be I/O bound. That the servers and code, the execution environment of a server-side script is I/O bound. Because most of the time you're waiting on very slow processes like sockets to return data, access to the file system. Usually database, you're hitting the database. That's normally what's taking a long time. And and that talks about it in here. And then we talk about single-threaded, non-blocking APIs, which Node is, or JavaScript is in general. So I'm going to skip over that, but you should read that and think about that. So let's just dig right into this, this part of the assignment. So the assignment, in the course of the assignment, we end up creating 4 files. So we're going to go ahead and do that to see what's involved. So here's some code. This shows how to retrieve data from a server using the HTTP communications protocol. The code illustrates callbacks. So I'm going to just copy that. We don't need that. That's just there. Maybe I don't need that yet. JavaScript allows the use of anonymous functions, and then the following code shows how to rewrite the program in the previous section so that an anonymous function is used rather than the named function on response. So that illustrates that. I think we talked about that last time. As an exercise, refactor the above code so that the functions on data, on end, and on error are replaced by their anonymous equivalents. The resulting program should produce the same result. Place your program in a file named geturl.js. So let's do that, and then I can talk about what's going on here. So it's geturl.js. Geturl.js. So what this is doing, let's see, we're importing this HTTP module. And then we declare this function on data, on end, on error. These are event handlers. And then here we create an HTTP request object. We do that by calling this get function on the HTTP module. This get function returns the request object for us. It also starts a process in the background, which is to fetch the data at this URL here. And when it finishes fetching that data, then it's going to, what's it going to do? I know what it does. It's a little bit, it's not quite that simple. It's going to start fetching data from this URL. Now this callback here, which is the second argument to get, is this is a function that's called when, I don't know exactly when it's called, but it's in this callback function that we want to register these event handlers. Oh, this is called when a response object is prepared. So as you can see, the function is, there's 2 objects that the system creates for us. One is a request object, that's here. That represents our outgoing request. And the other, which we register an event handler on that down here. See, request.onError, call our onError. We're just going to print, if we gave the wrong URL here and it doesn't point to something valid, this error handler is going to get called. This error event is going to happen. So we've got a request object. The request object has events on it. We're only interested in one event, this onError event. So that's the only reason we use this REQ object right now, the request object. Now the other object represents the data coming back from the server. So request represents the data we send to the server, and the result object, or RES, represents data coming back. Now when we call this get method to go ahead to tell the node or this HTTP module to fetch this data at that URL, it's going to construct a response message for us. It's going to create a socket. It's going to do some stuff. I think it's going to check for, if it can't make the socket, if it can't resolve that internet name, for instance, can't find that server, then it's going to generate an error down here, and it will never call this callback function. We'll never have a response object to deal with. But let's suppose that it can make this connection to this web server, and that things are ready for us to start processing, on the result. So the system passes us this result object. Once we have the result object, we can then register these event handlers on the result object. So we've got the result object, but the data hasn't yet come in yet. So the data is going to come in chunks. That's what this event handler is doing. It says each time you have a chunk of data, call my onData function. And when you've reached the end of the response and you've received all of the data from the server, then call my onEnd method. So that's how this works. That's how we set that up. And of course, onData, when we get a chunk, that's why we call it chunk here. This thing gets called repeatedly for a chunk of data each time we get the chunk. And we're just going to print the chunk length. That's it, just to look at it. And when we're done, I'm just going to say response message received in full. That's it. If there's an error, of course, we're going to print the error. So let's see that this, in fact, works. Get URL.js. Look at that. So we successfully retrieved the data from here and discarded it, but we measured it. How much? These are the size of the chunks. Look at that. See? So we do get the data in pieces, and if we wanted the data for some reason, we would need to concatenate it together, put it in a form that we could use it with. All right, so now the task is to refactor the code so that the functions onData, onEnd, and onError are replaced by their anonymous equivalents. So here, we'll start with this onError. Instead of calling it by name here, we define it where we use it. So onError, now notice onError takes an argument, see? So I know that this function has to be declared as taking an argument. And then there it is. See, this is the second argument, exactly, right there. Starting from the F and ending with a closing brace. So onError, call this function. Now we don't need this anymore. It goes away. And oh, did I get the wrong one? I just did the wrong one here. Sorry. It's onEnd. Sorry.
There we go.
Actually, I'm just going to delete that. So when the error occurs, we get an error object, and we're going to print the error message. Actually, let's test this code before we go any farther. And to test it, we need an error. How about this? COMX. I don't think that exists. So that should trigger an error. There it is. Got error, address info, E not found. So that's the code they're giving us there. So in fact, that's working. So this, see, it said got error colon. See, got error colon. That's the message. E dot message. We dumped that out. So let's get this out of here. Now let's do the same thing here. So instead of this onData looks like this. onData takes a chunk, right? And it does this. So let's go ahead and Well, maybe I'm not ready yet for that. Let's do it like this. It's a function that takes a chunk, not a chain, a chunk. It's a function that takes a chunk and does something. It does this. That's it. That's how we move it in there. See that? And same with the on end. On end doesn't have any arguments. Oops. Oh, you know what? I'm mixing tabs with spaces, and I don't want to do that, right? So remember, it's to have consistent spacing. Like if I set my tabs, right now my tabs are set at 8 spaces, but I set them to 4. If someone else is looking at this, now it's not working right anymore. So, let's get this fixed. I'm using tabs, not spaces, for indentation. There we go. And I'm just going to set my tabs back to 8. So there it is. Oh, we need to test it, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Looks good. So that's how to do that part. Now let's move on and look at this other stuff. Now here it's how to pass errors to callbacks. That's the issue here. And the convention is, now we pass the error code in through the first argument. So if there is no error, we call the callback with a null. So see, when you call a non-blocking function, the error might happen right in that moment, but usually not. Usually, the error is going to happen later on. So you need to pass that error condition to your callback function. By convention, you see a lot of programmers follow the convention. It's not uniform, it's not universal, but it's common to see Node programmers pass error information in through the first argument. If there's no error, we pass in null. It's as simple as that. If there is an error, pass in the error to the callback. See, CB represents the callback function. Whatever the callback function is on the code, it's going to call the callback function. So if there's an error, I call the callback function with the error. There's no need for a second argument. But if there's no error, I'm going to call the callback function with a null in the first slot and then pass in the data that it wants in the second slot. Just a convention, you see it, but there's exceptions. It doesn't always follow exactly like that. It depends on how you want to structure your program. If there's no data to return, then you just call the callback with a null. So in your code, in your callback, the first thing you want to do is check for error. If error is not null, handle the error. Otherwise, handle the normal case. Let's create a file called error.js to hold a program that illustrates the error handling conventions.
Yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
What's that?
That's what I'm at right now.
Yeah, that's where you are. Okay, good. Let's do this together then. Define a function named divide by that illustrates the conventions. The following is description of the divide by function that you should implement. So it's called error.js. There's a description of the divide by function. You also need test code that calls divide by. Complete the following code and include it in your program. So let's go ahead and paste that in there. So here's some test code. And this divide by, this should be closed off right there, actually, right? I don't know if I need to add that in there or not. Would that be helpful if I put that in there? Let me stick that in there. So people aren't too confused there. Here. We just close that right there. All right, so let's see what it says. So this function divide by illustrates the conventions. Divide by takes an x and a y, and it divides x by y. And when it gets the result, it passes the result to the callback, CB. But if y is 0, then we can't divide by 0, so that's an error. So we're going to return the instance of error. Error is a predefined constructor function in the JavaScript language. That is a feature of the language of JavaScript. So we create an instance of this error class and return that instance in the first argument if y happens to be 0. Otherwise, we divide x by y, return the result in the second argument. And here's the code to test it. Let's see. Let's how we're going to test this. So if y is 0, return an instance of error in the first argument of CB. Oh, you know what? I'm going to go with tabs here. And I'm just going to show people that I'm going to do this. Stretch this out a little. If y is 0, return an instance of error. If y is 0, I'm going to use double equal sign to coerce it because it's going to get coerced anyway. So I'll show you a couple of ways of doing this. So I'm going to call a callback with the error. What do I call it down there? Division by 0. It's undefined. And now, once this is done, like once we call a callback, I guess we can put an else in here. Why don't we do that? How's that look?
Do you really need an else?
Yeah, or I can return. I can have a return in here because I don't want to execute any more code because it can't divide by y, so I don't want to even try. So if I leave the else out, then we can do, we can handle the special case like this. This is how I usually do it, to tell you the truth. And then the normal case, we don't indent that. And this is I got to tell you, this is a very common issue. Someone calls a callback because they're done, and then they forget to return, and they end up doing code that they're not supposed to do. Very, very common. So you got to pay attention to that. So otherwise, divide x by y, return the result in the second argument of CB, and set the first argument to null. CB x divided by y. Wait a minute. That's the first argument, right? The second argument. The first argument is null.
No, yes, no, then it will.
That's it. Do you see that? That's the function that I was looking for. And I'll just take these out because I don't need those. You guys can leave them in there if you want. Maybe there's too much space in there for you. It's up to you what you want to do. I like to put the space in. Now, what about the tests? We're going to divide 6 by 3. So that's good. So our callback so we're going to do these tests. We want to make sure that our function works correctly. So when we pass in a 6 and a 3, our callback, which is right here, we should get null for error. Is there like a certain null? Certain null? You guys know how to do that?
All I know is you have to assign something.
I know I can do it like this.
So it's supposed to put in a spot.
We don't need the .ok actually. This works.
We don't even know.
Yeah. Let me. You know what? I'm going to test it right there. What's the name of this one? Oh, error. Oh, I messed that up. Just forgot that.
Yeah, it's not.
Oh, I need to import that. Right?
Oh, you need to do the var assert. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, you require. Yeah. You won't work.
That's a system module suite,
System.
just like that.
Oh, you got okay, right? Oh, you do what?
Yeah, this is okay. This is the same as
The same?
.ok. Yeah, this is
Oh.
a shorter version.
Right.
It's much more
Okay,
convenient. Yeah.
Fix it.
Yeah, we could do .ok. We could do that. But
Shortcut.
yeah, this is easier to read. All right, so now assert that the result is 2. So the result should equal 2. There's no reason to use coercive equality because we're in control here. We're returning a 2. It's got to be a 2. All right.
It has to be 2.
Yeah. So we don't want to. If we can be precise, we will. But up here, I think it's helpful to use the coercion there because we don't know who's going to pass in what. They may pass in a character 0, which will get converted to 0. Yeah.
See how much we just kind of just focus and stuff. We even lose the light.
So it's the same down here. Assert that error is not null. Assert that the result is undefined. Now this is a little fuzzy for me. I think I can do this,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure. I think that's okay. Yeah, that's right. That'll work. And then the last one is the hardest one. Let's see if we got those done. Those are good. Assert that the type of ER message is a string. Use this type of function. We'll use non-coercive quality on that. And you know, this is one way to do it. So type of error.message can be written like this. Maybe this is easier to read. So I didn't mean to do that. This is the other way to write it. Now I just want to show you what that is. So console.log. What should this print? You guys tell me what this is going to print. What's it going to print? Well, first of all,
There's an error.
this error here, where does this ERR object get created?
That's
Huh?
right.
Which line? See, this ERR object is going to get passed into function, this function. This ERR object gets created somewhere. Which line does it get created? Huh?
It's not from, it's from the divided by function, right?
Exactly.
So it'd be line 5.
Line 5, exactly. Line 5. Right here, we call the callback. We pass in, see, that's one argument. You see, the opening, closing parentheses, just one argument. Just an instance of the error constructor, or error class, we could call it a class. So now when we create an instance of error, we pass in one argument, a string. That string is what this message attribute gets set to. Okay? You create the error message, you pass in the string that you want the message to be.
Yeah.
You got it?
Right there, yeah. You're absolutely right.
See it?
There we go. I get it.
Now you know. It took me, how long have I been using JavaScript? And I never really fully understood this until I started working with Node.js, and it's a funny language. I pick up things here and there all over the place very slowly that accumulate new information as I use it, and look up things on Stack Overflow and
There's so much
MDN.
can be done.
Huh?
A lot of things can be done just with Node itself.
Just with Node.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Do a lot of stuff.
Of course, this is a JavaScript. So
Yes.
This is JavaScript. So that's that one. Now let's take a look here. I'm going to create a module called util.js. Module should export a function named getURL. And this getURL function implements the logic that we used earlier in our getURL file, right? Remember when we retrieved Google's homepage? And they create another function named main.js that includes test code for the getURL function in the util module. So let's create that first. So this is main.js. So you can see here, this is purpose of main is to test the util module. So of course we have to require the util module. Notice we use a fully qualified path to the file because it's not a system module. It's one of our modules. So we got to tell it to look in the current folder to find it. And then we're going to call. We're going to test our getURL function that we're going to create inside of our util module. And we're going to say, retrieve this, and that here's the callback. Give me the content. Oh, I see some issues here. Notice the callback. Notice that the callback the getURL takes follows the error convention described above. Also notice that the callback takes as its second argument the content that was retrieved from the URL. So you know what? Maybe it's not clear to students what they need to do here. You will need inside util.getURL, you will need to concatenate the chunks as they arrive, and pass them. and pass this to the callback after the entire response is received. Is that okay? Can I write that differently, or is that clear? Inside inside util.get URL, you'll need to concatenate the chunks as they arrive, the chunks of data, I'll say, as they arrive, and pass this to the pass the accumulated data. Pass this accumulated data to the callback after the entire response is received. All right, so probably it wasn't clear that that's what I wanted. What else is not clear about this? You know, the other thing that's not clear is that I'm only testing a successful response. Right? We could do it, I could expand on that a little. Let's do this. So this, so the first thing we call get URL with, let's call it with a bad URL, a bad domain name, say, whatever. So that should print this error message. Right?
Oh yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah. And then in the second one, we call it with the good domain name, and we should print the content. So we got that. So if we run main now, it will fail because there's no module called util. So we need to implement that. I'm going to copy this get URL to util. Now, util needs to export a get URL function.
No.
Is that right? Did I implement util already? Did I just overwrite util? Oh, we didn't do that, right? Yeah, it was just get URL. We didn't create a util yet. Okay. All right. So at the very end, you know, we need to return. We'll do it like this. Exports dot get URL is going to be this function. And the function takes a URL and a callback. Oops. See that? And then, so let's practice we'll just call the callback with null and some test data. Let's just get it to work. This stuff we don't need yet. Just going to comment it out so we're not confused by it. So we just have a stub here. Someone calls get URL, we're just going to turn around and call the callback right away. But it's not very good test code because it's calling the callback in the same sort of pass. Really, we should add a delay in there and then call the callback after, in the future. I'll show you what I mean by that. It's because it may not test correctly. Let's see. So in other words, if when we call this get URL, we're going to end up calling the callback before we return from get URL. Let me show you what I mean. I'm giving you guys the deep level overview of this. So we're going to print done at the end. Okay, we should print done. We're going to say we're going to print. It should be the we should write something like. I don't know, end of main. So we're going to print now, the callback, the way it's construed now, we're going to call this callback. We're going to log the content. We're going to print hello, and then we're going to print end of main. See that? But really, it should be the other way around. We should print end of main, and then our callback should run. We should print hello at that point because that's if our test code were to better simulate what we're ultimately going to do. And so the way to do that is to use a what do they call it? A timer? What's in JavaScript? How do you do a set timeout? Is that it? Set timeout. Yeah, it just looks like that. Okay. So it's set timeout, and we have a function, and all the function does is it calls this this callback, and the second argument is the number of milliseconds to wait. I'm going to wait 10 milliseconds. I think you can pass on a 1, too. It's some minimum. I think 4 milliseconds is a minimum, something like that. But you can just pass in a 1 there. Maybe a 0 works as well. Let's try it with a 0 even. So here, what I want to do is I want to return from, is that an uppercase T? I think that is. See, I want to return from get URL before I call a callback. So I wanted to schedule the callback, this function to run. I want to schedule this function to run later, after I return from get URL and after main returns. You see that? This is a better test because this is what's going to happen when we actually go out and retrieve the data from the web server. So you've got to be careful when you're creating stubs for test purposes. If your code sort of expects for the callback to be invoked later, then you need to handle it something like this. That's a kind of a side issue, just to give you some more deeper understanding there. All right, so now let's go ahead and implement this this get URL function, and it's essentially this, isn't it?
Yeah, wait.
So now what we're doing is we want to get the URL that's passed in. And then we pass in this callback function. And oh, look, when we get the response object, we can access the status code. That means we've already gone and the system has already sort of retrieved the data for us. It's already started the process of getting the data. So it has a response code. We report that here. And we register the for the data event, and we have the chunk, and so on. On end is where we call the callback. Remember, the error information is passed into the first argument. And this time we're going to say by. Our data is by. And here, this data here, we'll just comment that out for now. So whenever we get the data event, we're not going to do anything. And when the message is retrieved in full, we're going to pass by as our data. Just for testing, we're getting there one at a time. Also, when we have an error here, what we want to do here is call our callback with the error. See that? We can simplify that. Status code 200, that means success. 200 means everything was good. There's the data by. What about the, let's try the error case here. I added that. There it is right there, right? I put it on the top here. So now it should print the error. I could do error.message, but I'm just going to leave that error in there. Let's see what it does. There it is. But it's a lot to read, so what we could do is just do the error.message. There it is. And the main, this is the error, and there's the data. Now we need to get the data. You guys want to pack up there?
No, you just I'm sorry.
So let me get the, let's figure out how to accumulate the data. So we want to return the data. Watch this. Instead of by, we want to return the data. So when the data comes in, we want to accumulate the data. Which is a sequence of chunks. And I'll do this with, there's a way to do this chunk. We're just going to convert everything to a string for now, but maybe I'll think about fixing that later. So this data we'll start with an empty string. We'll just append onto the empty string. There it is. Look at that. Watch this. lt.html. Okay. We just take out the junk part. This is what we got from Google. So we'll open it. There it is. That's the data right there. We can vision.
That's cool.
Yeah. So now, Probably shouldn't do it this way with a string. Probably should use a buffer object, and we're going to get to that later. It's in this, not this one. Do we go over buffers? We didn't do that.
No,
See,
not
up
yet.
in here.
We're close. We have events, which is not too hard, but then buffers.
Yeah, so events is there. So now look at, I want to show you some simplification. Look at this error here. When the error event happens, we call this function, right? But do you see the simplification? Let me show you that. Can you guys simplify this? So what does our callback function do? It just calls the other callback function. Well, why don't we just pass the other callback function in? This is that. Look at that. And now we just take this out. You see the simplification?
Talking about optimization.
Yeah, you can really, and let's see if it still works, of course. And to test it, let's comment this part out. We're just going to test the error. I don't have to dump everything on the screen. Up. I didn't want to do that. There it is. See, still works.
Fantastic.
Is that cool? And like I said, it's not good to use a string here, but that's what
We
we have.
should stay here.
Yeah. So that's that.